Welcome to the REI Hacker Podcast, where we unlock the secrets of real estate success. Join us as we dive into the journeys of top investors, mentors, and industry experts. And now, let's hand it off to our host, Benson Juarez.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here on this edition of the REI Hacker Podcast. Really excited to talk to my next guest. His name is Casey Gregerson. Casey is a former petroleum engineer. He's a serial entrepreneur and a professional real estate investor. Over the past decade, he's invested in hundreds of deals from wholesaling, fix and flip, as well as buy and hold. Casey now specializes in acquiring properties with creative finance, which means that his investors get the best investment with the best terms. Thank you so much for being with me, Casey. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Look, I'm looking forward to it. Good to see you again, Benson.
You too. You too. We've spent a little bit of time together here and there at different meetups and some of the events that are put on. And you've always got something cool going on. But, you know, in your past, you know, you spent nearly a decade as a petroleum engineer for Shell before diving full time into real estate investing. Engineers traditionally are trained to mitigate risk, but this business requires taking big moves and sometimes, getting out of your comfort zone. How did you reconcile that originally mindset wise?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's funny. When I was working at Shell, it was like it was either schizophrenic or bipolar, right? I had a life where it was like, yeah, all about mitigating risk, like a big corporate company. And even Shell as an operator, and I'm getting into the weeds already a little bit here, but like Shell as an operator in the oil and gas space was like, they were used to drilling like big wells off the Gulf of Mexico, right? And other stuff in other countries, like big projects, right? And then we would, as Shell as an operator, we would go work in like fields like West Texas or South Texas, where you'd have these other mom and pops, kind of like what you see on Landman, right? Or what you see on some of the TV shows. Like that's reality. And on a side note, that was my life when I worked in West Texas. Like it's hilarious. But anyway, so you think about those like mom and pops that are just doing whatever they can to be profitable. But Shell, on the other hand, was such a big company. They had so much structure and rules. And so it was really unique to where it was really hard to get decisions made and done. And then so much red tape when it came to working for a big company like Shell, right? But then so I had that life, right, where we were tuned and trained to be super risk averse and like all sorts of approvals to even just go take action required like 5 people's approval, right? But then on the other side, on my off days, when I had my 2 weeks off, I was running a real estate company, buying investment properties, taking risks, using leverage, right? Buying properties that were distressed, taking on all these different like scenarios and properties. So it was 2 different lives, and I definitely saw what I loved doing the most, right? I definitely saw that, all right, this is way too slow paced. I'm never going to be able to the biggest thing is I'm never going to really be able to impact my career and my life and ultimately achieve my goals moving at this speed. It's a slow, steady, safe way to do it that a lot of people do really good a lot of people do good with, right? But then I had my scenario where now I can create my own luck. I can create my own future, right? If I go hustle, I'm rewarded for it. And I can actually move faster and take some risks and actually have those gains.
Yeah. That balancing act early on is really challenging for a lot of investors who are trying to turn it into a business and not just, something that they're doing like a side hustle, right? Because you need to get to a point where you feel comfortable moving on from a steady paycheck and benefits and that, stability, and you having a family, you got other people to think about besides just your fantasy of being an entrepreneur and living that lifestyle. So what was it like for you balancing that early on when, you maybe had some money coming in and you thought, oh, I want to do this full time, but I can't jump out just yet. I can't get full-time results because I'm still doing it part-time because I need that stability for me and my family.
Yeah. So it was I think it's a different challenge for everybody, depending where they're at, right? I also talk to a lot of people who are like, they just want to get out of their W-2, get out of the rat race as fast as they can because they hate their job, right? Or they're just like, it doesn't align with their values, right? But in my scenario, like I still loved what I did in oil and gas. Like I learned, I had such good training. I enjoyed the people I worked with. I didn't enjoy like being away from my family and in the field for 2 weeks like that. And ultimately that's what really pushed me to leaving my job, which is another story I'd love to share later. But I kept my W-2 as long as I could because it gave me stability. And it was really allowing me to grow. One of the big things I did was when I went from like my first to my second rental properties, I went and started working with small banks, right? I went and established those relationships and had lunch with those guys, got to know them, and that helped me really compound and scale because I had the best of both worlds, right? I had a schedule where I could go fix and flip and buy rental properties on my off days, but I also still had a W-2 income that the banks could rely upon, right? So that was the perfect sort of avatar for them to go lend to because, again, they love the W-2, they love the experience, right? So I used that to keep building and being, and this was when rates were still good, right? Rates were competitive, there were still deals to be had, and I was able to really grow and scale that way. And it really, to me, it was a good, safe way to grow because, again, at the end of the day, my W-2 could support my family and pay my bills, but I was basically just compounding all these fix and flips and all these deals that I was doing successfully. Anytime I made a profit, I was able to go reinvest and buy another one. Or maybe this time, instead of reinvesting and buy another property, I could go hire another employee. I could go hire another full-time contractor to do in-house construction work. Or I could go hire a VA to help run my property management. And that's what really helped me build my vertical integration over the years was having that W-2 to support me and then being able to hustle, make profits, hire people, and ultimately build a system.
Yeah. So did you grow up in an entrepreneurial family? Like what was the fire that started this for you? Because I think that you mentioned someplace that like your family was pretty traditional as far as, having W-2s as well. Were you like the first entrepreneur in your family?
Yeah, definitely. My dad, if you're thinking about the Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which a lot of people can relate to that book or that analogy, my dad was definitely the poor dad mindset, and he wanted to work the W-2 job, wanted to play it safe, right? Wanted to like invest in a 401k, didn't want to go take a bunch of risk on, like, I'll never forget this story from my dad. I remember he was an attorney, but he worked for the city, right? So everybody's always like, oh, your dad was an attorney. You guys must have had it good growing up. But again, we had what we needed. It was great, right? But it wasn't the luxurious, like, your dad's an attorney gig, right? Because he worked for the city. And I'll never forget this, but he loved that, right? He loved the predictability of it. And honestly, he had a good balance. He was able to be there for all of our games, and he was there, and he was a really supportive dad, right? But I'll never forget when he left his job as a city attorney, because they changed over leadership at the mayor was changed out, and he ended up going a different direction. So he had to go actually work as just work for himself, right? And go do his own consulting and his own attorney work. And I'll never forget how stressed he was. And I remember him just coming home once and just seeing the look on his face. And he's like, today, I think was a good day, Casey. He's like, I think found a new client. But I just remember him being so scared. And as soon as he had a chance to go back and have the W-2 and the more predictable income, he did it. So yeah, I definitely didn't come from that sort of mindset, but I think, I think it was just me getting in the W-2 job, getting a taste of that, but then getting the taste of being an entrepreneur and seeing how rewarded I was being, right, for hustling and working hard. And just when you get to see like just that benefit of in that real-time benefit, right? Versus, I always joke about this with Shell, a big corporate company, because I quickly found out this, like, whether you work 20 hours a week or 60 hours a week, right? Say everybody on average is supposed to do 40, but whether you truly did 20 or 60, your difference in pay was like 10%, maybe 20 if you're lucky. Like, there was not incentive to go double or triple your workload, right? There just wasn't enough upside. But when I was an entrepreneur, if I worked 60 hours instead of 20, like, that made a big difference in my bottom line. So I think that was probably the biggest driver to me, really turn me into an entrepreneur.
And you even had entrepreneurial ideas in real estate before you got with Shell, right? Where you had the time to do it. And that was when you were in college and you got your first, I guess, house, right? It was a house hack, and you leveraged again, right? You were already using leverage at a young age because you got a loan from your parents, and they co-signed. Like, that was a pretty big move for someone who's in college. I actually did something similar, but what was that story?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the one thing my dad did, one of the best things he ever did. And I've tried to do it for my kids as well, is, and I've tried to do it at a younger age, but most people don't get this at any age, right? But the fact I was probably 22, 23 at the time, I had just started grad school and didn't own any property, had never even thought about buying property. And as the story goes, it's funny, in this college town where I still own this property today, and now I own quite a few more in Laramie, Wyoming. It's a college town, like highly driven rentals by tenants, and it's honestly, it's one of the best markets I invest in still today. But the weird thing about this town is a lot of the parents, it's the only 4-year university in Wyoming. So a lot of parents will, if they have multiple kids, they'll go buy a house when their kids move down there. And then they'll keep it till, like this family, for example, my roommate, he was the third brother of 3, right? So it'd been passed down. All the brothers that lived in them. He was the last brother and he was moving out. So they were going to sell the house. And he comes up to me one day, we're sitting at the house watching football or something. And he goes, Casey, so my dad's going to sell the house, so I'm moving out. He's like, why doesn't your dad buy it? And I was like, oh, I don't know. Let me ask him. So I went and talked to my dad, and he's like, well, Casey, I probably don't want to buy it, but maybe you could buy it. Like, maybe you could go get a loan. Why don't we go talk to the bank? So we went down to US Bank, where I'd always had my checking account, and went down there and had the conversation. And they're basically like, well, you're going to need a cosigner. And my dad was willing to do that. And I needed about $10,000 down, which I was able to actually use some of my college savings that I hadn't used, because I was lucky enough to have a college football scholarship in my undergrad, where I hadn't had to tap into all my college savings. So we took that 10,000, bought that first house, and for sure, yeah, that gave me a leg up on everything, because again, I became a landlord. I did house hacking back in 2010 before it was popular.
Yeah, I did it in 95 is when I started. Did a house hack. My parents co-signed for me. Yeah, same thing. And then I lived in one room, rented out the others, and that was like my first, real estate deal. But I remember it was so far back, right? I mean, in the 95, like they still had books.
Wow.
Like the MLS was a book that they carried around. It was craziness. Lots changed since then. But you're a very process-driven person, right? And part of that comes from your engineering background, and with a lot of checklists and SOPs and processes, and it's kind of step by step. And you've used that same sort of methodology in your real estate business to perfect the process. And you said that, like, you've built businesses around each process of investing. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, I mean, maybe the best way to explain it is like the first one I built out, right? And again, I like telling the story of like how it naturally happened. So working, so everybody knows, let me back up a little bit. So everybody probably remembers where they were in 2020 when COVID hit and we were all locked down. If you guys were in the oil and gas industry, you remember that was when oil went to negative. So it was like a rough time, right? We're all locked down. Oil's gone negative. And our company was at Shell. I was still working for Shell at the time. Well, they were laying off 40% of us. So literally half of us, 40% of us lost our jobs, and we had to go repost within Shell. So I was in that little middle ground trying to figure out if we were going to have a job or not. And I looked at that time. I'm like, okay, well, at the time I had about 10 properties and we are locked down in COVID, nothing to do. And I was managing about 10 properties from Houston, but they're up in Wyoming and Dallas, Fort Worth. Right. So I'm doing these all virtually, and I go read a book, another great book that I highly recommend for a lot of people. It's called 4-Hour Workweek. Right. So I'm reading 4-Hour Workweek. They're talking about VAs, and I'm like, wait, if I'm able to manage this all from Houston on my computer, and I had my own system for like finding tenants, advertising, screening them, leasing them up, signing the leases, dealing with like repair requests, rents, and all that, collections, everything. I was doing it all with my relationships that I had boots on the ground. I'm like, why can I not train a VA to do it? Right. And so I'm like, and especially after the book, I'm like, I can do this. So again, back to the processes and systems, I'm like, well, I got to document this, everything I do, right? I've been doing it for probably 4 years at this. Well, honestly, let me back up. I'd been doing it for 10 years since that same rental property, right? I hadn't lived in Laramie for like 10 years. Right. And I was still doing it. I'm like, so I wrote down everything I did. I just typed it into a Google Doc. And then when I was introduced to Loom changed my life, right? Loom's a recording software where I would just record myself doing whatever task. Maybe I was listing my rental, or maybe I was processing an application, and I would record myself doing it, and I would copy that link into a Google Doc, and I just built out this 10-page SOP of like, hey, here's all the steps of property management, right? But again, fortunately I'd seen how to do this working for Shell, right? We would go drill a horizontal well out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, or maybe West Texas. We would drill down like 10,000 feet, and then you'd kick off with this like directional motor, right? And then you drill another 10,000 feet horizontally, and then you'd pull that all out, and then you'd run casing down there, and then you'd pump all the cement down there through your casing, outside, up the hole, and it was this big, complicated, very technical process. But the way they were able to repeat that was you had an SOP, right? And the SOP was iterated. Like, it was written first by the engineers, and it was followed, and then it was iterated, right? And you did after action reviews. After every well, you would say, hey, what went well, what didn't? And they would document that, and then they would go re-update the SOP. So I took that same learning and that same mindset and process and just applied it to property management and had VAs doing it. So then when I went and had my virtual assistants execute on it, like, they took the SOP, they executed it, but if there was anything that was different that they were doing, it was their job now to update the SOP, right? So that's it in a nutshell. And I did it in property management. Then I applied the same thing in my acquisitions, like direct to seller company. And then ultimately now we're working on really implementing it in construction to really standardize our construction crews.
Yeah, once you perfect the process, it's really simple to transfer that knowledge to somebody else. And VAs are trained to be able to take these processes and implement them. But a lot of people go out and they'll hire VAs before they've perfected the process.
Yeah.
Right. Which is a huge problem. This is why a lot of people don't like VAs. Like, oh, VAs don't work. It's a waste of money. But because it wasn't set up properly in the first place. They didn't perfect the process. And sometimes people hire VAs and tell them to go figure it out. Like, can you just go figure out how to do this? And this is my opinion, that why so many people fail with VAs is they're just not doing it right.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you got to go through a couple, right? Like, I went and paid a headhunter to find one, paid like $2,500 to find one. But the cool thing was they started at like $550 an hour. We originally recruited in Mexico, and they spoke good English. And yeah, the first guy, like, I got taken advantage of, and it was a bummer, and I was frustrated. But luckily, I hired, I think, one later on, and I had two, and then I got to see one actually thrive and do well, and then that one helped me hire more, and now it's been a big success story. But I agree, don't expect the first one to work out great, because like you said, you're not even going to be prepared and ready to hire your first person, right? Even if you did what I did and you try to write it all out, you're still not used to like training and just knowing that process look like. So expect to fail on the first one, but if you stay persistent, now I've probably got at least 10 different virtual assistants helping in all of our different companies.
So you figured out a way to basically leverage time and money. And usually that can lead to scaling, which you've done an excellent job of, is scaling and launching different, verticals completely, and, doing more of the same thing. But what's one of the horror stories you've had of maybe just scaling too fast, like a mistake that you'll never repeat ever again?
Oh man, but plenty of them. Because yeah, some people struggle with this, right? Failing forward, right? And me, I'm like, hey, we had success. Let's go repeat it. Let's go delegate it. And I'm just, in general, it's a blessing and a curse, right? I believe in people, and I believe, hey, they're going to take ownership of this. They're going to go for it, and they're going to treat it like I do. And then they don't, right? I think the biggest thing has been on construction. We've been trying to do in-house construction for years now, and we finally are getting better at it. But it's one of the biggest headaches we face on a day-to-day basis. Like, even this past 7 days, right? We're still working with getting contractors on the same page and getting them to understand like the thought process, like on even knowing a rental, like this is a rental renovation and this is a fix and flip for $400,000, right? There are different expectations of the level of quality and the level of work. I mean, it all needs to be safe and functionable, right? But we don't need to have every perfect square down to the T, not one little imperfection on the wall if it's just a rental, right? So these are just little battles we go through. But to answer your question, it was just iterating and finding the right contractors, right? I would find a guy, thought that, all right, this guy's good. He knows what he's doing. Let's go give him more projects, right? Like, hey, we had successful one. Let's go do 2 or 3 or 4. But then you don't realize this guy, the jump from 2, 3 to 4 might be easy for me and me to conceptualize and me to execute on. But That's been a huge one, right? And even still to this day, like giving contractors more than one project, it's not like, all right, it's a 4-week project and then I give another 4-week project. So therefore they should be able to take, I can give them both at once, and maybe worst case, it'll take 8 weeks, but it should be linear, right? But it's not, because now they're going back and forth and it's not efficient. And then you just add another project on, and then whatever. You start running in all these hurdles. And I've just found with contractors, if they're not just focused on one, nothing gets done, right? So that's probably one of the best, one that sticks out for me in terms of scaling. Like you gotta start, especially with contractors, you gotta start slow and just little building blocks, but not big building blocks, like little baby steps.
So that's the lesson then, is, you know, just having the expectations set properly for yourself, that they're not going to be able to take it and run like you can until they prove otherwise. So baby steps, give them a shorter leash, more check-ins, more KPIs, so you can monitor the progress until they get to a point where they can prove they can handle all the extra work and the quality of the work isn't going down.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going over budget. You're not going over time. All the things still work, but it's just, you're doing it more intentionally.
Yes. Yeah. Cause you kind of look at it on paper, right? You're like, hey, I got a rehab budget and I know what my ARV is and I know what I'm buying the house for. You're like, all right, all these things check out, right? It looks good. And you do one of them, right? And then you try to go scale up and do multiple ones. Cause on paper, the numbers, they look like they're there, but the management and ensuring, like, yeah, again, just when it comes down to construction, it's a lot of attention to detail. And there's not, I wish there were more out there, but like just crews and project managers and people that they just don't care as much as you do, right? So it's a lot of, I always underestimating the sort of the babysitting component, if you will.
Right. So have you thought about just replacing yourself with a babysitter? Like bring somebody in who's just really good at babysitting, and then you can focus on higher end projects and, you know, doing the higher leverage things, right? Raising money, running businesses, starting new opportunities, being the visionary.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I did it a couple of years ago, and that was the first big role. So I hired my COO. It's almost 2 years ago now. And the cool thing is I've had my COO. He's come to the majority of the masterminds. Like I'm part of a Collective Genius and also part of like Owners Club and Sub 2. But Collective Genius is like a really niche, like real estate one. And I've been able to bring him there, and that it's really cool because we get double exposure into all the presentation and all the connections. So he's been learning the business. But one of the best things that I've been able to hand off to him is the project management one. And we just recently did this in the last year. And yeah, because it was the biggest time suck. You're getting all the calls. And to your point, you're doing a lot of the babysitting. So that was a huge one that I handed off, and I still have to help him on time day to day. But now I'm excited for him to be able to handle, like the next phase is like, all right, let's actually hire a true project manager so he can be a true CEO or COO and manage. Ideally, we're trying to get to where he would manage my property manager, the property manager, project manager, and my acquisitions manager, right? And then he could manage those guys, and then I could truly be a CEO, and he could be a more effective COO.
Definitely. Yeah, that's all part of the growing pains of growing a business. But you're not just doing real estate. You're also like buying businesses, right? You're buying franchises and other opportunities.
Yeah, we actually, so the franchises that was kind of how we started to learn how to run a business. We had, at one point we had, I think 6 or 7 Pure Barre franchises. It's a women's like boutique fitness studio. And we bought those in Houston all the way out to San Diego. And we've since sold them all, right? And I've learned a ton of lessons. That's really where I learned to run a business, where I learned marketing and sales. Because I always make this joke, like as an engineer working for Shell, I was not trained highly on marketing and sales. That was a skill set that I didn't realize I actually had until I opened our first franchise, and it was like baptism by fire, either sell or go out of business. So I figured it out and realized it's actually one of my biggest strengths. And today I definitely think one of my superpowers is being a closer and helping close deals, right? So it taught me a lot about myself. It taught me a lot about business. But the last thing it taught me about, which is to your point, is not all businesses and franchises are created equal, right? Some of them are just, you're just buying a job. And what I realized with that franchise, it's a really good model when it's owner occupied and the owner's really involved, but it's a hard one to scale with employees. So that's what, when we sold all those a couple of years ago and doubled down, we're like, let's go. That's when I doubled down into my real estate companies, right? Into really building out my direct to seller company, building out construction and property management. And we've leaned full on into that. And now the kind of the last company we built out recently in the last 2 years is our fund, right? We have Bighorn Capital Fund, which can now bring in accredited investors and they can go fund our deals.
Yeah, a lot of people, like, there's like a kind of a normal path of growth in the real estate business. So a lot of people start off because they have no cash, right? So they're not going to go and start off with fix and flip or buying a rental property. A lot of people will start off in wholesale, right? Because it's low cash investment and you can just hustle your face off and you can close deals. And then they upgrade to fix and flip. And then once you do some fix and flips and you figure out the headaches of that, and you're gray and your joints hurt, and then you're like, okay, let's start building a portfolio. But you're still doing a lot of the things that people are moving away from, even though you've launched the fund. Is there a plan to move on from fix and flip and focus more on passive investing and helping others to invest passively in real estate?
Absolutely. I still love the direct to seller. You definitely do get perspective when you go, like, we've gone on and done some major big or large multifamily. We've done a 66 unit and a 45 and a 23. And we actually have an offer out right now on a 120 unit. And when you start to look at the scale of these, you're like, oh, wow, I shouldn't be worried about all these single family flips that take a lot of time and bandwidth. But at the same time, I really like our market and just the reputation and the business we've built in Wyoming. Our company's WIO Houses. And we have that domain, and that we've become kind of that household name for Wyoming's, like, we're like Wyoming's number one home buyer, right? So it's one that I want to continue to keep ongoing, because again, it's just the deal flow pipeline, right? It constantly feeds us deals, and maybe we're just going to wholesale them or novate them. But my goal is to just continue to hire those roles, right? I still play a big role in the closer in our company, but now the cool thing just in the last 3 months is I've been able to recruit, like, we have 4 different closers, really. I mean, they're taking it from appointment all the way to contract, and then I'm helping them when they get stuck. But my goal is, eventually they don't need me other than the really big deals, and they can keep that business going, right? And then the fix and flip and construction, that's just such a game changer. And it offers, here's the thing about that, is I think that when it comes to my fund, and helping people, limited partners, like, my big thing is when I'm presenting this to, like, a guy that I worked with in oil and gas, or maybe somebody who's sold part of their business, or just somebody who's got like a self-directed IRA, right? And they want to get a better return than they're getting in the stock market. Or maybe they just, again, and the fourth one is people who just have their money, maybe 50K sitting in an account, and they're like, oh man, I want to do something with this, but I don't want to put it in the stock market or whatever, right? But with those people, and those investors, what I love is, like, they don't know how to find a deal, right? They don't know how to go negotiate. They're not doing all the marketing. They don't know how to go find the contractors and manage them. They don't know how to manage tenants or have the desire to manage tenants, right? But I love that we can do all 3 of those. And then we also raise the capital. And I plan to keep them, because I feel like we mitigate so much risk, right? So when I was first learning from, like, a lot of other high level guys who were raising capital, they're like, if you can't articulate the risk of your investment and how you mitigate them, like, you have no business really being in this space, right? Because there's risk in everything. And one of our biggest risk mitigators is, again, we are sourcing the deal, right? We don't have to go buy it from a third party contractor, right? We've done the underwriting, we've done the due diligence, right? And when it comes to construction, a lot of times that's our in-house guys. And if it's not, it's a GC that we've worked with for a long time. And then when it goes to property management, like, we know it's predictable. And I like that, because at each one of those phases, like, we should be generating some revenue or some capital, right? And that's why I've set it up that way. But to me, we can hedge a lot of risk and bets, because let's say that we do make a mistake, or maybe we overshoot the ARV, or maybe the seasonality adjusts a little bit and the market's slower. Like, right now, it's just a little bit slow because that time of year. Like, let's say all that happens. Well, we can cut costs on the wholesale side of it, or the direct to seller. We can cut costs on construction, right? Because we do it in-house, or maybe property management. I just feel like it gives me way more maneuverability to still make a deal. You know what I mean? So I think I plan to keep them all 3 going and continue to work and feed each other, keep that spin wheel going.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and plus, you can get a lot of active cash out of those flips deals that you can put into your passive investing. A
Yes.
lot of passive people who raise money, like, they're not liquid enough to invest alongside their investors. And so when their investors ask, well, how much did you put money in the deal? And if they're just a GP and they're not an LP in the deal too, it's harder to raise the money.
Hmm.
But if you're investing alongside your friends and family, or maybe people you worked with, accredited people, right? And they think they're investing with you, and that fundraising process is much more smooth. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what's been nice is you had to invest alongside people because it'd be like, hey, I not only want to be the GP, I want to be part of the LP with you guys. And yeah, for sure. And to your point of like that really is the active income that's really because we're playing the long game, right? When it comes to the funds and these longer term like capital raises as a GP, I really get paid when this thing sells, or if we crush it, I'll get paid a little bit along the way, but it really is a big payout on the back end, right? But these fix and flips, that's what keeps kind of active money coming in, right? And it keeps the
Hmm.
marketing machine going, right? Keeps the contractors paid, it keeps them busy, right? And keeps that machine oiled and running.
Yeah. But at some point, like you said, you can phase out of that because you've replaced yourself. You may not even have to be the CEO of these companies one day. You just own them and you're on the board and you check in every now and again to make sure everything's running smoothly. But that's like the best process there is just to keep leveling up, slowly replace yourself over time, and then you can focus on these high leverage things where, in 5 years after you close, you're a deal, right? And you have that big exit and everybody doubled their cash, then you can do the next one, the next one. The next thing you're doing thousand doors on in one deal.
Absolutely. Yeah, like property management is the perfect example of it. Like that's one where I've been able to get out of it. And this
Hmm.
is why I like it, maybe to give people perspective, right? So like if you could also just do work through a property management company, a third party, right? And then everything goes through them, they handle, you get the same service, right? But I love that like I've been able to do the job, I understand it, and I replace myself. But now if I ever need to go jump in, like it's literally, I know they meet every day at 10 o'clock. My COO leads them, and then we have the property managers on that call. Like if, for example, we're say vacancy is higher than I want it to be, or maybe they're not pushing rents, or whatever the reason is, like it's a matter of me hopping into that meeting and course correcting or giving feedback, or just looking at high level numbers. Versus if that was a third party, I'm trying to get an appointment with them. I'm trying to get them to go update their process or change things, right? And they're working on 100 other clients, right? I love that control that I could jump in and course correct.
Yeah. So you got a contract in on this big building. You said it was 100 and how many? 60?
120 units. Yeah.
120 units. Where's that located?
It's in Southwest Wyoming. Yeah, down in an
Okay.
area where it's been really we recently bought a 45 unit down there too, and it's not far from the it's close to like Salt Lake City and Park City. And
Okay.
then also a lot of other cool driver going in. We're super bullish on that. I could go for a while, but Bill Gates he's converted a coal plant into a nuclear power plant there. So there's all these jobs coming in there. There's some trona mines being built. So there's already not enough rentals there, and there's all these jobs coming. And our 45 unit has done really well because of it. So when we saw another bigger deal, yeah, we were pretty excited.
Oh yeah. So is that the investment thesis of your fund is multifamily, or are there any other asset classes that you could invest in?
Yeah, the cool thing about our fund is it's a customizable fund. We use the platform, we use Avestor, and I'd always recommend that for any other investors who are looking at like a flexible fund platform because here's the kicker, right? So all my investors get a K1 from the same parent company, right? But then we get to have deals. We have each deal has its own deal disclosure, right? So we call it like it's the lower level asset LLCs. Or if you want to compare it, I was talking to somebody else. It's kind of similar to a series LLC. Again, I'm not an
Mhm.
attorney. There's little differences, but think about your parent LLC and your series. Okay, so each one of these investments are separated, right? So I did that same deal I was telling you about the 45 units. We did a deal and we raised $1.7 million for that one, right? That's one offering we have, right? But the latest offering is, well, I have two of them, right? I have a debt offering where we just have this evergreen debt fund where we're paying between 10 to 12%. And we made that one to have it be flexible so investors could come in and out and actually be able to redeem within 90 days. right? So that's a really good one for people who want to get in, put their money to work, and have it be set up more as debt. And I love it because it just allows, it's a good little working capital line slash fix and flip line for us to keep growing the business, right? So that would be the number 2 one. But the third one, I definitely am most excited about, Benson. It's because I'm combining, to answer your question about like what's the strategy, I've combined several of them, right? We're doing buy and holds, right? Both some single family and multifamily. For example, we're looking at a 29 unit apartment deal that we've kind of all penciled out, working with the bank and have our kind of LOIs and all that going, right? But then we're also going to fix and flip. And the reason I want to fix and flip, some people might be like, oh, that's 2 different strategies. You shouldn't do that, not together. But I love it because in Wyoming, right now we're seeing kind of a little bit of a lull in the market, and it's really mostly weather related, right? Rates are also impacting it, but we see typically every year everything heats up in the summer, right? Things at part of the country, right? That the market really heats up come summertime. But right now it's slow. So we're being very aggressive in getting more deals under contract. And the plan is we're going to go fix and flip those within the fund, right? So if the market does what we think it will and it heats up, we're going to hit some like triples, home runs, and some really good profitable deals that will sell, right? And then we'll be able to recycle that in the fund and keep it going. But here's the kicker. What if interest rates, maybe they start climbing again, and then maybe we finally are seeing with affordability and issues in the market, which again, there's a lot of other factors in Wyoming that are continuing to drive it forward based on inventory, right? But let's say that all that goes out the window. Like we could just hold on to these. And that's why I love setting up in the fund, because it kind of takes the seasonality out of it, right? Like if we can time it right and sell it, great, we'll do it and everybody will be excited. But even if we can't, we'll hold on to it. We'll cash flow it, right? Because there's so much demand for rentals in Wyoming and not enough supply. So I'm really excited to be able to keep them as rentals. But if we have an opportunity to flip them, we'll flip them. And anyway, the long-term plan is this is going to be a 5-year hold where we're doing some fixing and flipping, buying some multifamily, and then within the 5 years will be the planned exit.
Yeah, I like to have those multiple exit strategies there. So you just have to underwrite them ahead of time from both of those strategies, right? An ARV sort of fix and flip model, and then underwriting it from a rental strategy as well. And no matter what happens, everybody wins.
Exactly. Yep.
Are your investors okay with that? Like when they come in, are they confused about these different strategies? Or do you just maybe say, okay, well, that's fine. We got another you can just invest in this fund. You don't have to be in this one here that has different strategies built into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there for sure, this one is going to take somebody who either just understands our business model and has been seeing what I've been doing for years. A lot of them just see it and they're like, hey, I just want to be a part of it. Yeah. Right. And some of them are also just a little bit more sophisticated, been around more deals and just understand it. They're like, yeah, I want upside equity. Right. But the ones that are like, oh man, that's just a lot. I've never even fixed and flipped a house. I don't know where to start. Like those are people, that's why that 12%, 10 to 12% debt deal is perfect for them. And then they can get comfortable, right? That's sort of been the natural organic growth I've had through my fund, is like people come in, they become a lender, right? It's much easier to understand that. You're just secured with debt. You have a fixed return. You're the only one on the property. Very secure, very easy to understand, right? But then they get their feet wet there, and then they go start to look at, again, they get on my email list. They start to see all the deals we're doing, and they're like, oh man, I want to participate in that. And then I think in general, they feel comfortable because, again, I'm just very transparent in the underwriting, right? Like this, I could share it with you right now. It's actually on probably one of my tabs because I was sharing it earlier today. Like I've just got a spreadsheet where I underwrite, okay, here's what the deals look like that we're planning to hold, right? Now, here's what the deals look like that we're planning to flip. And you can just kind of see how all the numbers play into it. And I've got it kind of a baseline of like, hey, here's what we're looking at now. And then we'll continue to repeat looking for properties like that, because we've been doing it like that for years. And maybe I know I'm going long here, but the other thing is I keep a track record, right? And I was, again, taught by another guy who raises a lot of capital. It was Lance Peterson, right? Lance is great at this. Lance is like, if you don't have a vault and you can't show your investors like the deals you've done, and you can't prove HUD statements and photos and just have all the documents, then you probably shouldn't be raising capital. So I took my licks on that one, that I didn't have that ready, and I prepared it, right? I went through and I found all of our flips, got all the HUD, I used my VA, right? We built out a spreadsheet. So now I've got 125 deals of similar deals that we've done this strategy on. The same strategy we're doing in the fund, we can go show these 125 case studies that they can go look up and pull the pictures and pull the title reports and everything they want. It's all right in front of them.
So you said you took your licks on that, meaning you had somebody ask for that before and you didn't have it. So you potentially lost an investor at that point.
Yeah, you know what? I didn't, fortunately, because of having good mentors, I didn't have to go down that far. I had actually just joined Avestor, and Lance Peterson is one of the, I think, the best educators when it comes to raising capital. And I was just going through his course, and he was talking about doing that. I'm like, oh man, that's good. Like, I know people ask about like track record, and I've got like a couple little like, I've got at that point I had a project book, which is still great. It had some before and after photos, what we bought it for, what we paid for it. But it's like, if an investor asked all those different things, like, I don't have it. So fortunately Lance kind of gave me the answer to the test before I started it.
Yeah, Lance is great. He's a really good asset to the Avestor group for sure. So you're this entrepreneur, right? You're making big moves, but at the end of the day, well, you even said this when you one of the major drivers of quitting your W-2 was being away from your family, right? So I'm guessing like your family is part of like your why, right? Why go through all this stuff every day? Why go through all this stress? Explain more of your why to us, and why you're putting yourself through this, and maybe even some additional stress on the family.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if it's okay, I want to share a story that really, I think, drives it home. It kind of starts like working out in the field when I was first starting with Shell, right? When you first work for Shell as an engineer, you spend like 6 months in the office, and you go to the field for like a year. And when I got to the field, I loved it because I'm like, oh man, I work half the year. I'm on for 2 weeks and then I'm off for 2 weeks. Don't even have to open a cell phone, right? So I started working that schedule. I did it for years, right? But I remember being out there, and again, if you guys could picture this picture, if you guys have seen Landman, that was me out there working on the rigs, driving these crazy roads with all this traffic and danger. And anyway, and that's when I first started to ask the question. I'm like, but what if I didn't have to be out here away from my family for 2 weeks? What if I could be home every day being with my kids, right? That's when I first asked it. And eventually I was able to get back into the office, right? And was home every day. This was about 2020, 2021. We went through COVID. That's when back to that story I shared earlier, when everybody's getting laid off. Well, fortunately I was able to get a new job with Shell and reposted and got a job off in the Gulf of Mexico. And I'll never forget this one, right? So I've been home now for about the last year working an office job. And now I've got, instead of the one kid I had back in the day in the field, I've now got 3 boys, right? But my oldest son, he's older now. I think he was probably about 7 at the time. And I remember I had to go out to the field, and this was still like lingering COVID, like post-COVID, where like, this will blow your mind. I had to drive to Houma, Louisiana, sit in a hotel in quarantine for 7 days, I had to like locked in a hotel room before I could even get on the helicopter to go fly out to the platform in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico indefinitely, right? And I was going out there for 3 to 4 weeks, depending on when a helicopter could come get me. So I was about to leave my family for 4 weeks potentially, and not even know when I'm coming back. And I remember my son was really struggling with it. And this is where it gets hard, is I'm like, it was really hard to leave that night and go drive down to the hotel, and got out late, and finally was driving down, listened to a book. I remember, I'll never forget, I'm listening to my audio book, passing the time, finally getting over the fact I had to leave my family. Well, then my wife calls me, and she's like, hey, Casey, checking in. And we were just talking. She's like, I don't know if you noticed this, but your son, Colt, he's like, when you left, he chased your car down the street. Like, I had to chase him like 2 blocks. He didn't want you to leave, and he ran after you. And she's telling me this, and I'm driving, and I'm like 2 hours away, and I'm like 2 hours into this 28-day stint. And it was just, I'll never forget it, right? And I was just like, man. And so that created, I mean, I always talk about like events that cause like inflection points, right? This was an inflection point where I'm like, I don't want to have to do this again, right? And I want to figure out a life and a career and something where I don't have to make this choice. So I immediately went into that. When stuck in those 7 days, like, I used every minute I had in that hotel room to start building the business, right? And I did that every day for the next couple of years. And ultimately, when I was able, it allowed me to be able to step away from oil and gas and do this full time, to where now I could be there for the kids. I'm not away from them. I get to be at all their games. But it was because I worked hard and created passive income.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's such a powerful story. I can imagine that inflection point was like, okay, this is it. I mean, we're not doing this again. I'm burning the bridges. I'm burning the boats at the beach. We're doing this business thing. Family is so important, and for a lot of people, it is their why. But for a lot of people that struggle in business, they don't have a strong enough why. Fortunately for you, you found one fairly early on, and it's helped to propel you to everything you're doing now, including launching your fund recently, which is exciting. Congratulations on that as well. There's probably a lot of people here that want to work with you or want to reach out and connect. Where can people find you? You have a YouTube channel, don't you?
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say anywhere, whatever's easy for the audience, right? If you guys like absorbing content or learning through YouTube, check out my YouTube. It's all of my social media is just Casey Gregerson. You can find me, just spell it with all E's and you'll find me. And the other big one is the playbook, right? So I created this free passive investing playbook that, again, if you just go to my website, caseygregerson.com, it's right there on the top and it's free. And that's got a vault for to really get people started. And again, just to drive this point home a little bit more, what allowed me to make that choice, again, back to having to leave my son, that drove massive action into me to start figuring out what I could do to create enough passive income to where I could leave, to where I could, when challenged with the question between work or business and family, I was able to choose family, right? And not everybody has that choice. And that's what's really provoked, which I hadn't mentioned at all yet. And it's probably what I'm most excited about. Because over all these years of building out this company, everything we talked about, what I really found my biggest passion was helping other people achieve that same passive income that I did. And that's why I set a goal about a year ago, was to help 100 families achieve their passive income goal, right? And again, fundamentally, you understand where it comes from now, right? I knew how it changed my life. And I just know so many other people that I worked with in the oil field or engineers or any industry, right, that are in that same boat where they're having to choose work over family. And I'm like, if I can help those people and now they can go make the same choice, or at least give them the option to where they could make that choice, make the choice they want to make in that day, that's what's really powerful to me. And anyways, and that's why I'm so passionate. So if people want to get started, I would go check out the Passive Investing Playbook on our website. That's a great way to first start. And then I would love to just get on a call with somebody after that and figure out, hey, what is the next steps for you? What does passive income look like for you? Because everybody's different, right?
Absolutely. Everyone's got different reasons, different whys, and everybody starts off differently too. So, the first good step is education. So if you guys are interested in this process of investing in, multifamily properties or maybe your debt fund, go to his website. We'll put the links in the show notes there, and you can go get his passive investing playbook, which can maybe start to fill in the gaps for you. But then, of course, just talk with Casey. He's doing some really exciting things out there. But I want to thank you, Casey, for taking the time. Thank you so much for jumping on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Benson. Love what you're doing with this. It's cool stuff.
Oh, you got it. No problem. And everybody, thank you for listening to this edition of the REI Hacker Podcast. Keep an eye out for really amazing guests like Casey. In the near future, we talk about real estate investing and entrepreneurship and business, and really just looking for inspirational stories to help us in our businesses and help us to keep pushing and finding that entrepreneurial spirit that we're all looking for. So thanks for listening, and we'll see everybody next time. Take care.